That's right, I'm doing a top 10 list. It's not something I usually do, don't know if I'm going to do it a whole lot, but I thought it would be a fun video to visit the top 10 dumbest things that I've heard flat earthers say. Let's start at number 10, an Einstein quote.
I don't know if maybe people know that Einstein said this. If the facts don't fit the theory, change the facts. That's an easy way to make the earth move.
You might be wondering why I put this in a list of the dumb things flat earthers say. Well, that's because Einstein never said this. Ever. And all it takes is a simple search in your favorite search engine to see that this quote is simply misattributed. And I believe it was Ivanka Trump who tweeted this out. And then she got a lot of flack, and it was a big deal, so you would think that people would now know that Einstein didn't say this. But here we are, and flat earthers are still repeating it. The reason I put this at the bottom is because this, I think, has the most plausible deniability. We can give this one the benefit of the doubt, so to speak. But it only gets worse from here. Number 9. Why can't we feel the Earth moving?
Movement of the Earth, whether it is the 1,000-mile-per-hour spin, wobble on its axis, or the blindingly fast speeds it's going around the sun or moving through the Milky Way, they are never observed, felt, or even recorded ever in history.
Now, I put this at the bottom of the list because this is something that not everybody might know. I mean, you should if you went to high school, but still. Well, there's an easy explanation for this, of course, that you don't feel motion, instead you feel acceleration. And while there is some acceleration of the Earth spinning and revolving around the sun, there is some acceleration. But it's very negligible because of how big the radii are. I don't know why I have to explain this. But of course there's plenty of reason to think that we are on a spinning globe that revolves around the sun, not the least of which being stellar aberration, which has been documented for a long time now. There's also the trajectory of planets in the sky, which are sort of like a spirograph, if you kids know what a spirograph is. And, well, there's no real explanation for this on the flat Earth. Number 8. It looks flat to me.
Then you should have the exact same effect looking left to right on the x-axis. You should be seeing ships rolling up to the top of the ball and rolling down. You know, I mean, if it's a ball, they got to be rolling both ways, away from you and side to side. We never see that though. You can go to the beach and do a panoramic shot, put a parallel line over it, flat.
This is a fairly common thing that you'll hear from flat earthers. Where's the curve? I don't see a curve. It looks flat to me. Of course, the Earth is just way too big to be able to see the curve from the ground. You have to get into high altitude in order to really visibly, very clearly see the curve. If I can find it, I'll show you the demonstration I've recorded once of just how big the Earth is. Here is a semicircle. Now this demonstration is to scale, so the radius of this semicircle matches the 6,378 kilometer radius of the Earth. Now let's zoom in. Keep zooming. Keep zooming. Keep on zooming. Almost. There. The block on the left represents a 6 foot or 183 centimeter tall person, while the box on the right represents a possible width of an oil tanker at 40 meters. Point is, Earth is so goddamn big that it looks flat from this perspective. I mean, technically it's not, because the edges of the screen are indeed lower than the center, but not enough to move even a single pixel. Not enough to move a single pixel for a long distance. And definitely not enough to see with the naked eye. This is why you can't see the curve from the ground. It's also why you can't see the curve from the mountaintop. Number 7. Zooming in on ships brings them back from over the horizon.
I would also remark that when the sea is undisturbed by waves, the hull can be restored to sight by the aid of a good telescope long after it has disappeared from the naked eye, thus proving that the ship had not gone down behind the watery hill of a convex globe, but is still sailing on the level of a plain sea.
I mean, it is true that with the naked eye, it's going to be a bit difficult to see a ship that's close to the horizon. But when we zoom in with either a telescope or a really strong zoom lens on, say, a camera, yeah, it does indeed go over the horizon. I'm going to show you an image on the screen here. This is my favorite image from civilwartalk.com, and I love bringing this image up because, well, quite frankly, it proves them wrong. It shows exactly what they say we wouldn't see. That ship right there is over the horizon. No amount of zooming is going to bring it back. This is indeed zoomed in pretty far. I believe it was a Nikon P900. I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to have to check. Number 6. Is the Earth a sphere, an oblate spheroid, or is it pear-shaped?
Over the years, NASA has twice changed their story regarding the shape of the Earth. At first they maintained Earth was a perfect sphere, which later changed to an oblate spheroid flattened at the poles, and then changed again to being pear-shaped, as the southern hemisphere allegedly bulges out as well. Unfortunately for NASA, however, none of their official pictures show an oblate spheroid or pear-shaped Earth. All their pictures, contrary to their words, show a spherical, and clearly CGI fake, Earth.
The Earth overall is pretty darn close to a perfect sphere. But it is not a perfect sphere. It is ever so slightly an oblate spheroid. But even that is ever so slightly not completely true, because there's an ever so slight amount more surface area in the southern hemisphere. This is not enough to visibly see and discern when looking at an image of the entirety of the Earth, but the surface of the Earth is not perfectly spherical. And yet flat earthers will take this to mean that the Earth is supposed to look exactly like a pear. Number 5, and at this point, I think we're getting to the really dumb stuff. So what's number 5? Well, it's all perspective.
Including and especially those of ships in the distance which appear to have gone down below a horizon, usually attributed to being curvature of the Earth when it is in fact simply the laws of perspective at play.
Now this is a very general point. This isn't something that flat earthers say in response to one specific thing, but instead it's something that they say all the time as a pretty much an excuse for anything and everything. It's a matter of perspective. This image looks curved close to the horizon. It's all perspective. The southern stars, there's a southern celestial pole that we wouldn't see and couldn't possibly see on the flat Earth. That's also perspective. If the Earth was flat, the sun would take a much different route in the sky and change its angular size due to perspective that we simply don't observe. Oh, well, that can be explained with perspective as well. They hardly ever attempt to go any further than just perspective, such as, what perspective are we talking about? How would this perspective cause this sudden warp in the image of the sky? It seems to me flat earthers would rather find an excuse that they find acceptable and not really question it much further than that. Number 4, let's just eyeball it. Now this is going to take a little bit of explanation. There's this organization called FE Corps, and this is the most scientific looking flat earth organization or project that I've ever seen. It's quite impressive how they try to be as scientific as possible while also disagreeing with every scientist for the last couple thousand years. So they performed an experiment, which they've, released in slideshow presentation as scientific articles are. They basically shined a light across a river and found out that you could see it on the other side. The idea was that they take a very precise laser, shine it parallel to the surface of the water, and if you can see farther than you would normally see on a round Earth, well, it's busted. There were a number of problems with this experiment, as you can imagine, and the biggest one, and the dumbest one, being how they leveled this laser. From what I understand, this is a very expensive piece of equipment, a very precise, very high-powered laser. And, well, here's how they leveled it. Quote, after sunset, the laser beam was adjusted parallel to the water surface using the horizon line and visible city lights on the opposite shore as a reference. To put it simply, they leveled this very expensive, very precise piece of equipment by eyeballing it. You'd think if they have access to what they call a super accurate laser aiming device, which I don't know that that's a real acronym for this, but you would think they would also have access to, say, an optical level? But no, apparently these guys are really good and their eyes are somehow able to tell the difference between a couple degrees from the horizontal. Alright, number 3. Gravity doesn't exist.
So, the science is that things rise and fall based on buoyancy and density. That's why raindrops fall and air bubbles in water rise. That's why heavy objects drop and balloons rise, is not because of any magical forces pulling you to ball Earth.
That's right, flat earthers don't believe in gravity for a number of reasons. And most of the flat earthers that I hear about and deal with from time to time think that buoyancy and density accounts for gravity. Because, heavy things fall and light things float, just like in water. This is one of the dumbest things I've heard them say. So if you actually understood physics, you might know that buoyancy only ever pushes things upward. Not only that, but buoyancy is caused by gravity. I think this perfectly highlights the sort of simplistic thinking that you have to have in order to be a flat earther. Like, oh, gravity can't exist because that shows so many issues with the flat earth. Let's scrap gravity and replace it with buoyancy. Well, when you question that and try to find out how buoyancy actually works, well, you wouldn't be a flat earther now, would you? A less common but far more laughable explanation is that the Earth is constantly accelerating upward. Of course, this would mean that we would be traveling faster than the speed of light within a year, but they don't care about that because they don't care about physics. I'm concerned about what is pushing Earth upwards at 3.8 meters per second, and doing this all the time, non-stop. I guess magical thinking doesn't stop you as a flat earther. Let's go on to number 2. And this is good, because the moon is not real. Or at least it's not really round. It's not really a sphere.
When something is round and too far away from you, you cannot say what shape it is. It can be a flat plate, it can be oblate, it can be concave, it can be a sphere. You just can't tell. Have you ever seen the moon rotating in the sky? You have always seen one side of it, which makes it impossible for anyone to say the moon is spherical. So we believe that the moon is a sphere just because the government told us so. Like the government never lied to you about anything and whatever they say is true. They just looked at them through a telescope and told you an imaginary distance because it matched some triangulations, and they just told you that they are spherical without even going there. And guess what? You just believed it without question.
But that's not it. That's not good enough. We need to go a little bit deeper. The moon does not reflect light from the sun, but it gives off its own light.
Why do we even call it a shadow? What if there is a light in the center of the moon that turns around and around?
The moon itself is a light. Somewhat like the sun, the moon is producing its own light.
And if you want to get even crazier, the light that the moon gives off is cold light. It doesn't add heat to anything, and instead, it makes things colder.
However, the moon's light is different than the sun's light. Whereas the sun's light is warm and golden, the moon's light appears to be cool, cold light, if you will.
This is not how light works. Light is radiation. It's energy, essentially, and that's not going to make anything colder. It can only make things hotter. And we can see shadows on the moon. We can see that there are craters, mountains, and the moon wobbles. So sometimes we see more of it than others. Not to mention the fact that we've photographed all sides of it, and we have some pretty good images from before CG was anywhere near being decent. But for some flat earthers, the lunar phases are a bit too much. That's something that they can't quite explain. I wonder why. So they have to find some sort of explanation, even if that explanation is the moon being fake. Number one, the absolute dumbest thing that I've heard a flat earther say, or really anyone say, in my entire life. You have to hear this.
Science says that gravity bends the light, right? So with that being said, your laser would hit the ground somewhere, or it would turn around the earth like this and hit you from behind. Why don't you do this demonstration and leave the laser like that for years until we all know that the laser is really bending around the globe? Is this so hard for you to do, Mr. Neil? Don't you have the money to do so? I guess you already have the laser, so all you have to do is put it parallel to the ground. It shouldn't cost you any money at all.
That's right, you've heard right. Gravity bends light. So, we take a laser, put it pretty high in the atmosphere, shine it parallel to the ground so the light will bend around the world and come back to it. Now, the first person to say this may or may not have been a troll, because those exist and I've been fooled once or twice. But whether or not the original person to say this is a troll, this has been repeated by other flat earthers, in particular Zach and Karen B, who together made a video that has this in it. That's actually where I got this clip from. I don't know where the original is. There are some flat earthers that take this seriously. Okay, alright, so to be clear, these guys don't think that gravity bends light, even though it does. And, well, they don't think the Earth is round, so I guess they don't really need to understand these concepts all too well, and, of course they don't. But gravity doesn't bend light that much, so I guess to them, in their minds, if the Earth was round, and you were on a tall enough structure or high enough mountain, you'd be able to see across the entirety of the whole world, so far as to see the back of your own head if you could zoom in far enough. That makes sense to them. So that's going to be the end of the video. I hope it left you with all of your brain cells intact. But as I said before, we are going to end every video with a reading from some sort of scripture. So today, let's go to Dianetics, huh? Let's go to page 126, I suppose. At the bottom of the page, it says, a Dianetic demon is a parasitic circuit. It has an action in the mind which approximates another entity than self, and it derives entirely from the words contained in engrams. So that was, I hope you all feel very enlightened, I hope you now have a deeper insight into the reality of the world that we live in, and that comes to you from popular science fiction writer L. Ron Hubbard. Goodbye. See you in the next video.
But they are now trying to spread false information to make the flat earthers look so stupid so nobody can take us seriously.